Joseph Sebastian thought he knew two things for certain. He loved his wife Kelly, and their son Patrick was his whole world. Then, a single piece of paper told him he was living a lie. Picture this, a King County courtroom in Seattle, Washington. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow on everyone present. Joseph sits at one table, his lawyer beside him, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles have gone white. Across the aisle, Kelly clutches a tissue, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Between them, a manila folder containing DNA test results that have torn their family apart. Mr. Sebastian is not the biological father of the child in question. The words from the genetic testing lab echo through the room like a death sentence. Joseph's eyes remain fixed on those results, 99.9% certainty. Numbers don't lie. Data doesn't make mistakes. That's what he's always believed. Kelly's voice breaks through the tension, desperate and raw. "I never cheated. Joseph, please. You're the only man I've ever been with." But her words bounce off him like rain off concrete. The science has spoken. The judge's gavel comes down with a sharp crack that seems to split the universe in two. Divorce granted, joint custody arranged. A family destroyed. But here's what nobody in that courtroom knew, what Joseph himself wouldn't discover for another 2 years. What destroyed this Seattle family wasn't infidelity. It was something far stranger, something Joseph had been carrying inside him since before he was born. Something that would rewrite everything they thought they understood about biology, identity, and truth itself. If you're intrigued by stories where science collides with real life in unbelievable ways, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button because this story will challenge everything you think you know about biology.
To understand how everything fell apart, you need to see what Joseph and Kelly built together. Seattle in autumn is a city of muted colors and constant drizzle, the kind of rain that doesn't pour but settles into everything. The streets, the coffee shops, the rhythm of daily life. It was in this city that Joseph, Sebastian, and Kelly had created their world. Joseph was 32, a software engineer at a mid-sized tech firm downtown. He was the kind of man who color-coded his calendar, who found comfort in algorithms and spreadsheets. If there was a problem, Joseph believed there was a solution. You just had to find the right data. His coworkers joked that he probably had a formula for making the perfect cup of coffee. They weren't entirely wrong. Kelly, 29, taught kindergarten at a school in the Ballard neighborhood. Where Joseph saw the world in numbers, Kelly saw it in finger paintings and gap-toothed smiles. She was patient, in a way that seemed almost supernatural, the kind of person who could calm a classroom of 25-year-olds with nothing but a gentle voice and a warm smile. She was Joseph's opposite in all the best ways, his emotional anchor when his logical mind spiraled too far into analysis. They'd met in college, two kids taking the same psychology elective. Joseph had needed it for his degree requirements. Kelly had taken it because she genuinely wanted to understand how people think. Their first date was at a cramped coffee shop near campus, rain drumming against the windows while they talked until closing time. 5 years ago, on a gray Saturday morning that felt perfectly Seattle, Joseph proposed on a hiking trail in the Cascades. Kelly said yes before he'd even finished asking. But marriage, they discovered, doesn't guarantee the future you imagine. 3 years. That's how long they tried to have a baby. 3 years of scheduled intimacy, basal thermometers, ovulation tests, and doctor's appointments that slowly drained the spontaneity from their relationship. Kelly would cry in the bathroom after each negative test, and Joseph would hold her, whispering reassurances he wasn't sure he believed. The fertility clinic became as familiar as their favorite restaurants. Each month brought hope, then heartbreak, then the determination to try again. The emotional toll was crushing. Friends announced pregnancies that felt like tiny daggers. Family gatherings became minefields of well-meaning questions. "So, when are you two going to have kids?" Joseph watched Kelly's smile tighten with each inquiry, watched her become a little smaller, a little sadder. Then, on a Tuesday morning in March, everything changed. Kelly took a pregnancy test in their bathroom while Joseph got ready for work. When she emerged, she was holding the plastic stick with trembling hands, tears streaming down her face. But this time, they were different tears. "Joseph," she whispered, "it's positive." The relief that flooded through him was so intense it nearly brought him to his knees. He pulled her into his arms, both of them crying, laughing, holding each other like they might disappear if they let go. After 3 years of disappointment, they were finally going to be parents. 9 months later, on a cold December night, Patrick came into the world. Joseph had been in the delivery room, holding Kelly's hand through every contraction, every push. And then, a cry, sharp, indignant, perfectly alive. The nurse placed Patrick in Joseph's arms, and the world stopped. 7 pounds, 3 ounces of wrinkled skin, and tiny fingers that immediately gripped Joseph's thumb with surprising strength. "Hey, buddy," Joseph whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm your dad." In that moment, holding his son for the first time, Joseph Sebastian had never been more certain of anything in his life. This was his family. This was everything. He had no idea that in 6 months, a routine medical test would tell him he was wrong.
Patrick was 6 months old when everything started to unravel. It began with small things. Patrick seemed more tired than usual. His skin looked paler. Kelly noticed it first, the way mothers do. At his checkup, their pediatrician ordered blood work, just to be safe. When the results came back, they were asked to come in immediately. The diagnosis hit like a freight train. Severe congenital anemia, a rare genetic blood disorder. Patrick's body wasn't producing enough healthy red blood cells. Without treatment, the condition could be life-threatening. They were referred to Dr. Sofia Martinez, a pediatric hematologist at Seattle Children's Hospital. She was professional, composed, but Joseph could hear the gravity in her voice when she explained their options. Patrick would need regular transfusions, possibly a bone marrow transplant down the line. The best chance for a perfect match would be an immediate family member. "We'll need to test both of you," Dr. Martinez explained, her pen tapping against her clipboard. "It's standard protocol. We'll run compatibility tests and genetic profiles to see if either parent is a suitable donor." Standard protocol, routine testing. Joseph barely registered the words. His mind was focused on one thing, saving his son. "Whatever you need," he said. "Test us both. Test me twice if you have to." They drew blood that same day. Joseph didn't even flinch when the needle went in. Kelly held Patrick in her arms while they took her sample, whispering soothing words to their baby boy who didn't understand why he had to be in this cold, sterile place. Then came the waiting. They spent hours in that hospital waiting room. The coffee from the vending machine had long gone cold in Joseph's hand. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly pale glow. Somewhere down the hall, monitors beeped in steady rhythm. Other families sat in their own private hells, waiting for news about their own children. Kelly's head rested on Joseph's shoulder. He could feel her exhaustion, the weight of fear pressing down on both of them. He squeezed her hand. "It's going to be okay," he promised. "We'll get through this. Patrick's going to be fine." She nodded against his shoulder, but neither of them spoke after that. What was there to say? 3 days later, Dr. Martinez called them back to the hospital, not for Patrick's treatment, for a conversation. There was something in her voice on the phone, a hesitation that Joseph's analytical mind immediately flagged as unusual. Something was wrong, something beyond Patrick's condition. The walk from the parking garage to her office felt like miles. Joseph's hand found Kelly's, their fingers intertwining the way they had since college. Whatever this was, they'd face it together. They always had. Dr. Martinez's office was small, cramped with medical texts and family photos on her desk. She gestured for them to sit, but she remained standing. That should have been Joseph's first clue. "Thank you for coming in," she began, then paused. Her eyes darted between them, and Joseph saw something he'd never seen in a doctor before. Uncertainty, fear
even. "There's no easy way to say this," Dr. Martinez continued, her professional composure cracking just slightly. "We ran the standard genetic compatibility tests, and there's been an unexpected finding." Joseph leaned forward. "Are we not compatible? Is that what you're saying? Because we can look into donors, we can—" "Mr. Sebastian," Dr. Martinez's voice was gentle but firm. "You're not just incompatible. According to the DNA analysis, you're not Patrick's biological father." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Joseph's world tilted on its axis. The room seemed to contract and expand at the same time. He heard the words, understood their meaning, but his brain refused to process them. Not possible. The data had to be wrong. There had to be a mistake in the lab, a mix-up with the samples. "That's impossible," Kelly's voice cut through his spiral. She was on her feet, her face pale. "You need to run the test again." "We ran it twice," Dr. Martinez said quietly. "I'm so sorry. The results are conclusive. The genetic markers show that Mr. Sebastian is not Patrick's biological father." Joseph turned to look at Kelly, really look at her. And in that moment, in that sterile office under those fluorescent lights, everything he thought he knew began to crumble. Before we continue, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment where scientific results completely blindsided you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're already hooked, smash that like button to help others discover this story.
Joseph's engineer brain went into overdrive the moment they left Dr. Martinez's office. Numbers don't lie. Data doesn't make mistakes. There had to be an error, a contaminated sample, a mix-up at the lab, something. "We need a retest," he told Kelly in the parking garage, his voice mechanical. "This is clearly a mistake." They ran the test again. Same results. Joseph insisted on a third test at a completely different laboratory across town. He paid out of pocket, didn't tell Kelly he was doing it. He needed to see for himself, needed the cold objectivity of independent verification. 1 week later, the envelope arrived. Joseph opened it alone in his car before going into work. His hands shook as he read the conclusion. 99.9% certainty. Joseph Sebastian is not the biological father of Patrick Sebastian. 3 tests, 3 labs, same answer. The conversation that destroyed everything happened on a Thursday night in their living room. Patrick was already asleep upstairs. The house was quiet, except for the rain pattering against the windows, that endless Seattle rain that now felt suffocating rather than comforting. Joseph sat on one end of the couch, Kelly on the other. The distance between them might as well have been an ocean. "Who was it, Kelly?" Joseph's voice was shaking, barely controlled. "Just tell me who." Kelly's face crumpled. "There was no one, Joseph. I swear on my life, on Patrick's life, there was no one. You're the only man I've ever been with." "Then explain the DNA results." His voice had gone cold now, that engineer's logic taking over, pushing emotion aside, because emotion was too painful. "Explain how our son isn't mine." "I can't explain it." Kelly's desperation filled the room. "But I'm telling you the truth. I have never been unfaithful to you. Not once, not ever." "The science says otherwise." Those 4 words hung between them like a guillotine blade. Kelly flinched as if he'd struck her. "You don't believe me," she whispered. "After everything we've been through, after 5 years of marriage, you don't believe me?" Joseph looked at the woman he'd loved since college, the woman who'd been his partner through everything, and he couldn't reconcile what he felt with what he knew. The data was clear. The evidence was irrefutable. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he said finally. 2 weeks later, Joseph moved into a studio apartment in Capitol Hill. The space was small, impersonal, with bare white walls and furniture that wasn't his. He'd taken almost nothing from the house, just his clothes, his laptop, and a single photo of Patrick that he couldn't bring himself to look at. Kelly's parents drove up from Portland the day they heard. Her mother held Kelly while she sobbed, while her father made quiet phone calls, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. They believed their daughter without question. How could they not? They'd raised her. They knew her character. Joseph's parents were caught in an impossible position. They loved Kelly like their own daughter. She'd been part of their family for years. But the DNA tests didn't lie, did they? His mother cried on the phone, torn between her son and the truth she didn't want to accept. His father, ever pragmatic, simply said, "The numbers are what they are, son." Friends took sides without understanding the full picture. Some believed Kelly's tearful denials. Others pointed to the scientific evidence and shook their heads sadly. The whispers started. At Kelly's school, in their neighborhood, in the grocery store. People who'd known them for years now looked at Kelly differently, their judgments written in sidelong glances and abruptly ended conversations. The divorce proceedings began in February. Joseph's lawyer was efficient, clinical, presenting the DNA evidence in manila folders that seemed to seal Kelly's fate. 3 independent tests, 3 confirmations, the biological impossibility of Kelly's claims. Kelly had no evidence, just her word, her tears, her insistence on a truth that science said couldn't exist. Her lawyer tried arguing lab error, but 3 separate labs made that defense nearly impossible. The judge, a woman in her 50s who'd probably seen every variation of family tragedy, looked exhausted as she reviewed the case. Science versus testimony, data versus human pleading. What was she supposed to do? Joint custody was arranged. Joseph would have Patrick every other weekend, Wednesday evenings for dinner. Legal, sterile, destroying what had once been a family. Those first visits were torture. Joseph would pick up Patrick, now 10 months old, starting to pull himself up on furniture, and feel his heart break and heal and break again in the same moment. He still loved his son. That hadn't changed. But now, when he looked at Patrick, he found himself searching for traces of a stranger in that small face. Whose eyes were those? Whose smile? The love was still there, but it had been poisoned by doubt, by betrayal, by the impossible question of how this could have happened. Kelly, alone in the house they'd chosen together, couldn't sleep in their bedroom anymore. She moved into Patrick's room, curling up on the floor beside his crib, listening to him breathe. Her kindergarten students asked innocent questions. "Where's Mr. Sebastian? Why doesn't he come to pick up anymore?" She smiled and deflected, but each question was a fresh wound. 6 months crawled by. Joseph threw himself into work, staying late at the office, taking on extra projects, anything to avoid the silence of his apartment. His coworkers noticed he'd become hollow-eyed, mechanical. The man who used to joke about algorithms now barely spoke. Kelly lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. Dark circles became permanent fixtures under her eyes. Friends stopped by with casseroles and concern, but she was disappearing into her grief, into the impossible situation of being innocent with no way to prove it. Patrick, mercifully, was too young to understand why Daddy didn't live there anymore, why Mommy cried so much, why the world had gone so terribly wrong. In June, the divorce was finalized. Joint custody remained. The house went to Kelly. Joseph kept his retirement accounts. Everything divided, itemized, legally dissolved. A family destroyed by science, by data that couldn't be wrong. Except it was.
2 years after the divorce, Joseph Sebastian scheduled a minor surgery. It was nothing dramatic, a hernia repair, the kind of mundane medical procedure that happens thousands of times every day. He developed it from lifting boxes during his move to a new apartment, and it had finally gotten painful enough that he couldn't ignore it anymore. The pre-op appointment was routine. Blood work, tissue samples, the usual battery of tests to make sure he was healthy enough for anesthesia. Joseph barely paid attention. He'd been through this process before. Sign the forms, roll up your sleeve, go home and wait for surgery day. But Dr. Emily Chen, a surgical resident with a background in genetics, noticed something unusual. She was reviewing Joseph's pre-op labs late one evening when something caught her eye. The blood work and the tissue samples didn't quite match. Not drastically. The differences were subtle, the kind of variance that most doctors would attribute to lab variation or testing error. But Dr. Chen had spent 2 years studying genetic anomalies during her research fellowship. She knew what normal variation looked like. This wasn't that. She ordered additional tests without telling Joseph, comparing multiple tissue types: blood, saliva, skin cells, hair follicles. When the results came back, she stared at her computer screen for a full minute, then picked up the phone to call Dr. Rajesh Patel, a genetic specialist she'd worked with during her fellowship. "I need you to look at something," she said. "I think I found a chimera." 1 week later, Joseph sat in a consultation room that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. Dr. Patel had insisted on meeting before the surgery could proceed. Joseph had no idea why. Dr. Patel spread a series of test results across the desk, along with several color-coded diagrams that looked like something from a science textbook. "Mr. Sebastian," Dr. Patel began, his voice careful and measured, "you're what we call a human chimera." Joseph blinked. "A what?" "A chimera. It's a rare genetic condition where one person carries 2 complete sets of DNA. Dr. Patel pulled up the first diagram. "Here's what we believe happened. Early in your mother's pregnancy, probably in the first few weeks, she was carrying fraternal twins, you and your brother." "I don't have a brother," Joseph said automatically. "Not anymore, but you did briefly. In those early weeks of development, one twin, you, absorbed the other. It's called vanishing twin syndrome, and it happens more often than people realize. Usually, the absorbed twin simply disappears, but in rare cases, like yours, the surviving twin incorporates the other cells into their own body." Dr. Patel pointed to the test results. "We tested multiple tissue types from your body. Your blood, your saliva, your skin, they all show one genetic profile, but other tissues, including your reproductive cells, show a completely different genetic profile. You're essentially 2 people in one body." The room felt like it was tilting. Joseph gripped the arms of his chair. "Your reproductive cells, your sperm, carry your absorbed twin's DNA, not yours," Dr. Patel continued gently. "Biologically speaking, any children you father would be genetically your nieces or nephews, not your sons or daughters. You'd be their uncle genetically, but the man who fathered them never existed as a separate person. He only existed as cells inside you." The words landed like physical blows. "Patrick, the DNA tests." Kelly's face streaked with tears, swearing she'd never been unfaithful. "Oh, God," Joseph whispered. His hands were shaking. "Oh, God, what have I done?" "Mr. Sebastian?" Dr. Patel's voice seemed to come from very far away. "I destroyed my marriage over this." Joseph's voice cracked. "I accused my wife of cheating. I divorced her. I let everyone believe she was a liar. And she was telling the truth the whole time." The room spun. 2 years of bitterness, of seeing Kelly's hurt in her eyes during custody exchanges, of friends and family torn apart, of Patrick growing up in a broken home. All of it because Joseph trusted science over the woman he loved, because the data said she was lying, and data doesn't lie, except when it's incomplete, except when it doesn't account for impossibilities, except when you're a walking genetic anomaly that medical textbooks barely acknowledge exists. "I need to see my wife," Joseph said abruptly. "Ex-wife. She needs to know." Can you imagine learning that the person you blamed and hurt was innocent all along? This is where the story gets even more complex. Stick with me, and if this story is hitting you emotionally, let me know in the comments. Your engagement helps these important stories reach more people.
Joseph stood outside the house that used to be his home on a Saturday afternoon in late spring. His hands were sweating despite the cool Seattle breeze. In his messenger bag were the medical reports, the genetic test results, the diagrams Dr. Patel had given him, proof of the impossible truth. In the front yard, Patrick played with toy trucks in the grass. He was almost 3 now, his baby features giving way to the face of a little boy. He had Kelly's smile, Joseph's, no, his absorbed twin's dark hair. The child looked up as Joseph approached, recognition flickering across his face. "Daddy," Patrick called out, then hesitated, confused by his own excitement. Daddy was for weekends. This wasn't a weekend. The front door opened before Joseph could knock. Kelly stood in the doorway, her posture immediately defensive, protective. She'd lost weight over the past 2 years, her face thinner, harder. The softness that had first attracted Joseph in that college coffee shop had been carved away by pain. "Joseph, it's not your weekend." Her voice was carefully neutral, guarded. "Is something wrong?" "Kelly, I need to show you something." His voice cracked on her name. "Please, it's important." She studied his face for a long moment, then glanced back at Patrick. "Come inside. Patrick, stay in the yard where I can see you, okay?" The living room looked different. She'd rearranged the furniture, painted the walls a soft gray, erasing him, making the space hers again. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the same positions they'd occupied during that terrible conversation 2 years ago. Joseph pulled out the medical reports with shaking hands. "I had surgery scheduled, pre-op testing. They found something." Kelly took the papers, her brow furrowed as she scanned the technical language, the genetic terminology. "I don't understand. What is this?" "I'm a chimera." The word felt strange in his mouth. "It means I have 2 sets of DNA in my body. When my mother was pregnant with me, I had a twin, a fraternal twin brother. In the first few weeks, I absorbed him. He became part of me." Kelly's eyes were still on the papers, not comprehending. "My reproductive cells," Joseph's voice broke, "they carry my twin's DNA, not mine. Patrick isn't genetically my son. He's my nephew. But the man who fathered him never existed outside of me." The papers slipped from Kelly's hands, scattering across the coffee table. "You were telling the truth." Tears were streaming down Joseph's face now, 2 years of anguish pouring out. "You never cheated. There was never anyone else. And I didn't believe you. I destroyed everything because I trusted science over you." Kelly sat frozen, her face pale. For a long moment, she didn't speak. When she finally did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you know what you put me through?" It wasn't a question, it was an accusation, righteous and deserved. "Everyone thought I was a liar, a cheater." Her voice grew stronger, harder. "Your parents looked at me like I'd betrayed their son. My colleagues whispered in the staff room. Parents at school requested their kids be moved to different classes. I heard the word whore spray painted on our mailbox, this mailbox, and had to scrub it off before Patrick could see it." Joseph flinched with each word, each deserved blow. "Patrick asked me every night for 6 months why Daddy left. He was a baby, Joseph. He didn't understand. And I had to tell him, what? That Daddy didn't believe Mommy? That Daddy thought Mommy was a bad person? Kelly," she stopped, swallowed hard. "My mother found me on the bathroom floor one night, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe, because everyone believed the science, everyone believed the data, and nobody believed me." The silence that followed was suffocating. "I'm sorry," Joseph whispered. "I know that's not enough. I know sorry doesn't fix what I broke. But Kelly, I am so sorry." She turned away from him, her shoulders shaking. "I want to tell people," Joseph said. "I want to tell everyone what happened. Clear your name." "And say what exactly?" Kelly's laugh was bitter. "Sorry, everyone. Turns out Kelly wasn't a cheating liar. Joseph's just a genetic freak. You think that undoes 2 years of judgment? You think people will just forget what they said, what they thought?" She was right. Joseph could already picture it, the awkward apologies, the people who'd remain distant because the accusations were easier to remember than the truth. Some relationships, once broken, stayed broken no matter how good the glue. "Some of our friends already don't talk to me," Kelly continued quietly.
Your cousin Sarah blocked me on everything. The Hendersons moved their daughter out of my class. You can't unring that bell, Joseph." Patrick's laughter drifted in through the window, innocent and unaware of the wreckage his parents were navigating inside. "What do we do now?" Joseph asked, his voice small. Kelly wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders. "I don't know, but you need to leave. I need time to think, to process this." Joseph nodded, gathering his papers with numb fingers. At the door, he turned back. "For what it's worth," Joseph said quietly, "you were right about everything, and I was wrong about everything." Kelly didn't respond. She just closed the door, leaving Joseph standing on the porch of the home he'd destroyed, holding proof that would change nothing and everything all at once.
Before we continue with Joseph and Kelly's story, let's take a moment to understand the science that tore their family apart and eventually brought the truth to light. Human chimerism is one of nature's strangest phenomena. The term comes from Greek mythology. The chimera was a creature with the head of a lion, body of a goat, and tail of a serpent. In medical terms, a chimera is a person who carries two completely distinct sets of DNA in their body. Here's how it happens. In the early weeks of pregnancy, a mother conceives fraternal twins, two separate embryos with two separate genetic codes. But sometimes, in those first critical weeks of development, one embryo absorbs the other. The surviving twin incorporates their sibling cells into their own developing body. The absorbed twin never forms as a separate person, but their DNA lives on, scattered throughout their siblings' tissues. The result? One person, two genetic identities. Scientists estimate that up to 10% of people might be chimerous without ever knowing it. Most people never have reason to compare DNA from different parts of their body. You could live your entire life as a chimera and never discover it, unless something forces you to look deeper. The most famous case before Joseph's was Lydia Fairchild in 2002. When she applied for public assistance in Washington state, DNA tests indicated she wasn't the biological mother of her own children she had physically given birth to. Authorities suspected fraud, even considered charging her with welfare fraud. It wasn't until doctors witnessed her giving birth to her third child and immediately tested both mother and baby that they discovered the truth. Lydia's reproductive organs carried different DNA than her blood. She was a chimera. These cases expose a fundamental assumption in modern DNA testing. One person equals one genetic profile. Our entire system of paternity testing, criminal forensics, and organ donation matching is built on this assumption. When someone is a chimera, that assumption crumbles. Imagine a family tree where Joseph sits at the top. One branch leads down to Patrick through Joseph's body, but the genetic material comes from a twin brother who never existed as a separate person. Joseph is simultaneously Patrick's father and uncle. The man who contributed the DNA to create Patrick never took a breath, never had a name, never existed outside of Joseph's cells. It's a biological paradox that challenges our very definition of parenthood, identity, and individual existence. For Joseph and Kelly, this scientific anomaly meant that 3 DNA tests, all accurate, all performed correctly, told a truth that was technically correct but devastatingly incomplete. Joseph wasn't Patrick's father according to his blood DNA, but he absolutely was Patrick's father in every way that mattered, including genetically, through the cells of a twin he never knew he'd absorbed. The science was right, and the science was catastrophically wrong. Healing didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen in weeks or even months. 3 months after Joseph showed Kelly the medical reports, they sat together in a therapist's office in downtown Seattle. Dr. Rebecca Torres specialized in family trauma, and she didn't sugarcoat the work ahead of them. Trust, once broken this profoundly, doesn't just snap back into place, she told them during that first session. You're not trying to fix what you had. You're trying to build something entirely new from the pieces. Kelly was hesitant, guarded. She'd agreed to therapy not because she'd forgiven Joseph, but because Patrick deserved parents who could coexist in the same room without tension crackling between them. Joseph came to every session with the desperate hope of redemption, knowing he might never receive it. Patrick, now 3.5, needed his own kind of healing. He'd learned to associate his father's presence with confusion. Why did Daddy come and go? Why did Mommy cry after Daddy left? In play therapy sessions, a child psychologist helped Patrick process emotions he couldn't yet name. Joseph's visits became more frequent, more consistent. Not the sterile, court-mandated exchanges, but real time together. Park visits, story time, building blocks on the living room floor while Kelly watched from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, protective but present. It took a full year of therapy sessions, of difficult conversations, of Joseph proving through actions what words couldn't convey. A year of Kelly slowly, painfully lowering the walls she'd built around herself and Patrick. A year of Patrick learning that Daddy wasn't going to disappear again. When Joseph finally moved back into the house, it wasn't a triumphant reunion. It was quiet, cautious. He moved his belongings into the guest room first. Trust had to be rebuilt room by room, moment by moment. When Patrick turned 6, they sat him down and explained, in terms a child could understand, why their family had been broken and how it had been repaired. You know how you learned about DNA in school? Kelly began gently. How everyone has their own special code? Patrick nodded, eyes wide. Well, Daddy has something very special and very rare, Joseph continued. Before Daddy was born, he had a twin brother, but that brother became part of Daddy instead of being born separately. Like a superhero? Patrick asked. Joseph smiled despite himself. Sort of. It means Daddy carries 2 sets of DNA, and the DNA that made you came from Daddy's twin brother, your ghost uncle. Patrick's eyes went wide with wonder. That's so cool. I have ghost uncle DNA? It was perhaps the only time the word cool had ever been applied to the situation, but to a 6-year-old, the science fiction reality of his father being 2 people in one body was fascinating rather than tragic. Does that mean I'm like a superhero too? Patrick asked. You're definitely our superhero, Kelly said, pulling him close. The family that emerged from the wreckage was stronger in some ways, more fragile in others. They carried scars that would never fully fade. Kelly still had moments when the memory of those 2 years would surface, the whispers, the judgment, the loneliness. Joseph lived with the guilt of what his mistrust had cost them. But they'd survived, and in surviving, they'd found purpose. Joseph and Kelly began advocating for changes in genetic testing protocols. They shared their story with medical boards, spoke at conferences, pushed for hospitals to test multiple tissue types in disputed paternity cases before families were destroyed by incomplete data. Their advocacy led to policy changes at Seattle Children's Hospital and eventually at facilities across Washington state. When chimerism was suspected, multiple tissue samples became standard protocol. Their nightmare became a cautionary tale that protected other families. They heard from other chimeras, people who'd discovered their condition through similar heartbreaking circumstances. A man in Oregon whose bone marrow donation revealed he carried his sister's DNA. A woman in California who'd been accused of kidnapping her own biological children. Joseph and Kelly's willingness to share their story gave these families a framework for understanding what had happened to them. Years later, sitting on their porch while Patrick played basketball in the driveway, now 10 years old, tall and confident, Joseph reflected on what they'd lost and found. I trusted data more than the woman I loved, he said quietly. I let numbers override everything I knew about Kelly's character. That's the mistake I'll carry forever. Kelly took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his.
a gesture of forgiveness, hard-won and deeply meant. "Sometimes the truth is stranger than anything we can imagine," Kelly said gently. "We expected science to be absolute. We forgot that science is discovery. We're always learning things we didn't know before." Their story wasn't a fairy tale. There was no magical moment where everything became perfect again. But there was something perhaps more valuable, the hard-earned wisdom that science, for all its power, is a tool wielded by imperfect humans trying to understand an impossibly complex universe. And sometimes, the most important data can't be found in a lab result. Sometimes it lives in the spaces between numbers, in trust, in character, in the knowledge of another person's soul that comes from years of loving them. Joseph had learned to trust that knowledge again. It had taken losing everything to understand its value.
From the courtroom where a family shattered to the moment of impossible truth, Joseph and Kelly's journey is one of the most extraordinary stories of how science, trust, and human resilience collide in ways we never expect. Today, Joseph, Kelly, and Patrick are living in Seattle. Patrick is 8 years old now, thriving in 3rd grade, playing soccer on weekends, and occasionally telling his friends about his ghost uncle DNA with the pride only a child can muster. Joseph and Kelly have rebuilt their marriage on a foundation that acknowledges both the scars and the strength that came from surviving the impossible. They still go to therapy occasionally, not because they're broken, but because they understand the value of tending to what they've rebuilt. The medical community has changed because of their story. Chimerism is now part of standard genetic counseling education. Hospitals have updated their protocols. Families facing similar situations have a roadmap, a precedent, a reason to dig deeper before accepting devastating conclusions. This story shows us that reality can be stranger than fiction, and that jumping to conclusions, even when science seems certain, can have devastating consequences. DNA doesn't lie, but our understanding of DNA is still evolving. What we think is absolute truth today might be incomplete truth tomorrow. If this story moved you, please like this video and share it with someone who appreciates real-life mysteries that challenge our understanding of biology. These stories need to be told, and your engagement helps them reach people who need to hear them. Now I want to hear from you. What's your take? Should Joseph have trusted Kelly over the DNA results, or was his reaction understandable given the evidence? I read every comment, so let's discuss below. This is the kind of moral complexity that doesn't have easy answers, and I genuinely want to know what you think. For more incredible true stories that blend mystery, science, and human drama, subscribe to Gilded Justice Stories and hit that notification bell. Every week, we explore real American stories that challenge what we think we know about justice, truth, and the human experience. Until next time, remember, the truth isn't always simple, but it's always worth pursuing. Thanks for watching.